Assalamu alaikum and good day. I am Mujahid M. Abdurrahman and today I am going to discuss Chapter 10, which is Conventional and Sustainable Practices in Farming. In this chapter, we will be uncovering interesting facts and the dark side of commercial and industrial farming and how it actually contributes more to environmental problems we are facing right now. But before this, let me read this opening quotation by Aldo Leopold. This quotation actually impliedly explains what drives us human in abusing land. It states here that we abuse the land because we regard it as commodity belonging to us. And it's absolutely true, right? We tend to abuse land because what we are actually thinking and believing is that land and other forms of nature are created for our sake, for us to consume and for us to gain benefits from. When we see land as a community to which we belong, as the continuation of the quotation, we may begin to use it with love and care. Meaning, if we had just anticipated that there are also other organisms that thrive or live on land aside from us, we may begin to use land with care and love. Land or soil is actually a community not just to us people, but to other organisms as well that thrives and lives on it, ranging from what we see in our naked eye to microscopic organisms. And by considering that, we may love every portion of land. So that's it. Later, there will be lots of situations corresponding to this quotation, one of which is the case study presented in this chapter entitled Farming the Cerrado. In this regard, it is being said that soybean boom is sweeping across South America. Inexpensive land, the development of crop varieties, and government policies that favor agricultural expansion have made South America the fastest growing agricultural area in the world. The center of this rapid expansion is the Cerrado. Cerrado is a vast area of grassland and tropical forest stretching from Bolivia and Paraguay across the center of Brazil. This land was once thought unproductive land for farming because of its red iron and poor quality soil are highly acidic to provide plant growth. Another, the unbearable warm and humid climate of the region harbors many destructive pests and pathogens that damage plants. That is why long ago it was just a pasture land used for growing livestock like cattle. But even for this type of agriculture, it's still unsustainable. However, because of the advancement in technology, Brazil have improved this land productivity by producing genetically modified crops like soybean and corn that are suitable to the soil and climate condition of the land. It also improves pastures for livestock. The government really had invested much support in turning this initially unproductive land into farmed land, and now, because of the vast area of this region utilized for soybean plantation and other crops and pasture livestock, Brazil became the world's top exporter of soybean, corns, maize, oranges, and others. As to the livestock development, certain global issues in the history favor this land to also become the top exporter of beef. Concern about mad cow disease in Europe, Canada, and Japan fueled increased worldwide demand for Brazilian beef. That was absolutely amazing for Brazilian government, however, as the growing global demands on Brazil's agricultural export continuously increasing, government had to consider agricultural expansion across the Cerrado, which resulted in destruction of biodiversity and creation of social conflict. The natural version of Cerrado was actually rich in biodiversity. It was once considered the richest savanna in the world, but because of agricultural expansion, habitat loss among diverse species forced them to leave the region and worse, died. In addition, it also creates a social conflict. Of course, before, local farmers were hired by the government to work on the land operation. But today, because of advancement in technology and manual operation can no longer sustain global demands, local farmers were replaced by machineries, and because of this expansion, they were also displaced from their home. So it's a double kill for them. They lost their livelihood and homes. The conflict arises to the extent that in 2005, a 74-year-old Catholic nun Sister Dorothy Stang was shot and murdered by gunmen hired by ranchers who resented her advocacy for Native people, workers, and environmental protection. And that's the sad story behind the success of Cirado. So this is what the quote earlier implies. Because Brazilian government was blind by business and profit until it forgot that Cerrado actually was not a land of their own, but a land thousands of communities to where they belong. So far, the case study reported that Brazil over the past 20 years had resettled 600,000 families from Cerrado, but still, tens of thousands landless farm workers and displaced families live in unauthorized squatter camps and shanty towns across the country waiting for relocation. So grabe no, iba talaga ang nagagawa ng development sa business and commerce. So much for that, let us proceed to our main discussion. Our learning outcomes for the whole chapter includes describe the components of soil, explain the ways we use and abuse soil, outline some of other key resources for agriculture, discuss the principal pests and pesticides, list and discuss the environmental effects of pesticides, describe the methods of organic and sustainable agriculture, and lastly, explain several strategies for soil conservation. All right, let's proceed. 10.1 entitled Resources for Agriculture, highlighting the importance of soil. Soils are marvelous complex substance. It is a combination of minerals, organic and inorganic matter, water, air, microorganisms, and others. It is also home to various species we mentioned earlier. Soil is finite, meaning it's not forever be available. However, it's renewable naman. Yun nga lang, renewing soil is a slow process. Data indicates that at least it took few years to build soil in healthy grassland, while few thousand years in a desert or tundra. Later, when we discuss soil formation, we will know the factors affecting the rate of soil formation and why it varies from places to places. Luckily for our topsoil, it accumulates up to 1 millimeter each year under the best condition. So we have here components of soil. Also, one of the factors for us to have varieties of soil around the world. First is sand and gravel. When we talk about sand, it is purely sediments of rock, a mineral particles from bedrock. Di pa siya nahaluan ng mga ibang materials like organic matter. Thus, it hard to grow plants in it. Gravel is a rock to which sand was weathered. Second, we have silt and clays. These components of rocks hold water content, thus making them sticky. Third, we have dead organic materials. These are organisms. Could it be plants, animals, insects, or fungus, died and decays, giving a black color to soil. This is what makes soil nutrient rich suitable for growing plants. The more blackish the soil is, the more nutritious it becomes to plants. Fourth, we have soil flora and fauna. These are organisms that live and thrive in soil. It could be plants, animals, fungus, or bacteria that help regulate soil fertility. If these organisms died, they would become dead organic matter. Five is water. Water coming from rainfall or groundwater, and lastly is the air. Tiny pockets in soil are filled with air, and this supplies oxygen to organism that lives or thrives on. So, you might wonder why minerals was not mentioned here when I have mentioned it to be one of those components. Well, soil comes from rocks and rocks contain minerals. If these rocks break as a result of weathering, inorganic matter and minerals will be suspended in soil. Aside from components of soil, soil texture is also highlighted here. Soil texture tells us how healthy and favorable soil is for plantation. Soil texture simply defines as the amount of silt, clay, and sand in the soil. We have here useful diagram that tells us what kind of soil will be based on their percent sand, percent silt, and percent clay. Okay, let's try to use this up. For instance, when we have 40% sand, 40% silt, and 20% clay, and plot it on this diagram, we would obtain loam type of soil. So that's how we use this diagram for determining soil texture. Next, it says here that healthy soil fauna can determine soil fertility. Well, fauna or animals that thrive or interact with soil do not only become useful when they die and become organic matter. They can actually do more while they are alive. First, died organisms do not decompose on their own. They need decomposers to do so. And these decomposers, like bacteria, fungus, and other microorganisms, they recycle litters and dead organisms and give soil a loose texture while making nutrients available for plants to take up. All right. It says here that the health of these soil ecosystem depends on environmental conditions such as climate, topography, and parent material. So let's talk about climate. Too much temperature, for instance, can kill the soil fauna or at least affect their healthiness. Dry climate can dehydrate not just the plant but also the soil fauna. Topography. Topography also affects the health of soil fauna. In a slopey area, for example, where erosion is prevalent, soil fauna can be washed away, or if not, the organic materials where they fed can be washed away by flash flood. It would leave them less foods to eat, and thus they become unhealthy. Lastly, parent material. We can be discuss this in detail as we go through soil formation. Okay, actually, soil formation is not highlighted here in this chapter. But for the sake of yours, gi-include ko na lang siya. Anyways, connected din naman siya sa next discussion natin on layers of soil. So here we go. Soil formation or pedogenesis tells us how soil formed. Soil began in parent material. This is when bedrock weathered and disintegrated. Yes, you heard it right. Soil comes from rock. Weathering continues for a long period of time till the initially rock becomes fine enough to be considered soil. So here are factors affecting the rate of soil formation. First are organisms. Animals burrows deep down, exposing the rocks outside to the agent of weathering. The concept is that mas matindi kasi ang weathering above than below, and mas matindi pa talaga pag nasa surface. So expected, rock at the top of bedrocks are partially loosened. This now allows burrowing animals to burrow deep down, and as they burrow, they turn the ground, exposing partially weathered rocks to the surface where weathering is intense. Another, plants. Plants, on the other hand, weather rocks as their roots penetrates through small holes in the rocks, and as it grows there, it forces the rocks to disintegrate, contributing to faster soil formation. Second factor is topography. The concept simply says that slopey area experience frequent water erosion, and since water is one of those agents of weathering, it therefore increases the rate of weathering and eventually soil formation. Third is climate. When we talk about climate, temperature really comes in our mind. Temperature or heat is also an agent of weathering. So, the more rock is exposed to high temperature, the faster the soil formation. So that's it for soil formation and factors affecting its rate. Anyways, I have put the YouTube video links there. You can just click on it for further understanding. So here we go. Layers of soil. Soil layers are called horizon. Each horizon is distinct in terms of content and compositions. First, we have horizon O or surface litter. This layer serves as protective lining that cover loose soil below. Plants and grasses grown here. Removing grasses, weeds, or plants as a result of excessive tillage or cultivation will expose loose soil of horizon A to erosion. The next layer is called horizon A or top soil. This layer is microbial and nutrient rich because it's where organic matter coming from horizon O and inorganic matter or minerals leaking from horizon B mixed together. So as the plants and animals and other organisms died, they decompose and sink to this horizon, making it the most fertile layer of soil. Next is horizon B or subsoil. This layer is rich in inorganic materials because as rock break through, weathering Minerals and inorganic matters like sulfur and phosphorus will be suspended and leak to the above horizon that is relatively looser. The next horizon is literally no longer soil, but partially weathered rock. This layer also contains inorganic matter though. The bottommost layer is the bedrock or parent material. It is completely rock. This is where soil formation begins. For further understanding, you can browse the YouTube link provided below. Our next discussion, which is 10.2, is all about ways we use and abuse soil. There are only about 11% of the Earth's land area, or about 100.1.5 billion hectares out of 13.4 billion hectares of land area is currently in crop production. In the theory, up to 4 times as much land could potentially be converted to cropland, but much of the remaining land is too steep, soggy, salty, cold, or dry for farming. So why do you think is this happening? Well, this can be attributed to the ways we use and abuse soil. Even in our daily lives, we tend to abuse land. How? Excessive sweeping, cultivation, and overgrazing leads to abuse of soil because doing so can expose tap loose soil to wind and water erosion. Industrially speaking, abuse of land can be characterized by converting other types of land into farmland, overplanting, excessive cultivation, and agricultural expansion. Let's just detail that one by one. First, arable land is unevenly distributed. So as we can see here in the map, there are only few of those lands suitable for cultivation. See the dark green color. Other from these few is even improved to allow cultivation, just like this light green color here in South America. It's actually the Cerrado in the case study. If we can just obey natural laws, many countries in the northernmost America, Asia, and Africa should no longer produce crops simply because their land type can sustain plantation. But what these countries do? What do we people do? We tend to defy natural laws. God had already designed certain land for us to plant on, but because it's unevenly distributed, and because of how intelligent we are and how advanced technology we have created, even land that are not suitable for cultivation, we still turn it into cropland. Look how many grasslands, forest lands, and savannas all around the world had turned into cropland as a result of agricultural expansion. Look at Cerrado, which is now completely turned into cropland. That's, I think, the most abusive act we had toward land and soils. However, nature also had done something to bring back the land we have converted to its initial type, including those initially cropland. Soil degradation and desertification all around the world is also increasing. This is the irony with us, so-called intelligent being. We tend at converting land into cropland, yet our natural cropland turning itself into unproductive land without our notice, care, or at least wariness. Let's look at what exactly soil loses and how soil loses its productivity. Agriculture is believed to have both cause and suffer from soil degradation. Soil degradation simply means losing fertility and productivity of soil. Every year, about 3 million hectares of cropland is made unusable by erosion worldwide, and another 4 million hectares are converted to non-agricultural uses such as urban land, highways, factories, or reservoir, as according to International Soil Reference and Information Center or ISRIC. Why do you think is this happening? Well, first, it's because of overcultivation. Soil loses fertility the more frequent you cultivate it. Kasi pag madalas nating nilinisan at saka sobrang paglilinis sa land, nawawala ang mga tuyong dahon and other organic matters above. Ngayon, saan pa kukuha ng organic nutrients ang soil kung wala nang ma-decompose? Another, pag nilinis mo ng sobra at madalasan ng soil, the loose soil and nutrient-rich soil below will expose to erosion. There we have wind and water erosion na siyang major causes of soil degradation. Natatangay kasi ang mga organic materials at loose soil ng flash flood or wind. Ngayon ang maiiwan na lang is subsoil na siyang di naman ganun ka-fertile. Ang nangyayari, the soil can no longer sustain plantation kaya ginagawa na lamang silang reservoir or industrial land, highways, and many more. Another, Overplantation, yung bang kaka-harvest lang, tataniman na naman ulit. Same effect pa rin. Soil needs also to rest, otherwise its fertility will be degraded. We have three types of soil of erosion. Remember, this erosion is the main cause of soil degradation and productivity. First, we have sheet and rill erosion, and this is by the movement of water. Sheet is called to the thin layer of soil taken up by water. Rill erosion happens when water cuts through the soil, creating its channel and moving everything along its path. Anyways, just look at the picture there for you to visualize how it works. Second, when this channel or rivulets increases in size and depth and turn into ravine, this is now called gully erosion. Lastly is wind erosion, which is the main cause of desertification. Just like water, wind also moves loose soil. If this happens, the initially fertile land will be degraded, becoming unproductive and eventually turning into. In this connection, according to United Nations, about one-third of the Earth's surface and the livelihood of at least 1 billion people are threatened by desertification, which contributes to food insecurity, famine, and poverty. Further, 80% of the world's grassland are suffering from overgrazing and soil degradation, and three-quarters of that area has undergone some degree of desertification. The concept here is same lang. Because of overcultivation, excessive plantation, and overgrazing, loose and fertile soil land become exposed to wind erosion. As the wind eroded it displaces those nutrient-rich land, losing soil fertility and eventually turning to desert. Next, we have 10.3, which is water and nutrients. Water and nutrients are two important supplements for growing plants. Soil actually does provide water and nutrients, but there are times soil supply is not enough. Like for instance, during summer where drought is more likely to occur, at this time plants really need water supply, and that is why irrigation since then does not absent in the field of agriculture. According to some research, about two-thirds of all fresh waters withdrawn from rivers, lakes, and groundwater supply is used for irrigation, yet only about 15% of all cropland worldwide is irrigated. The question is, where are those 75% of water go? Well, research found out that some of the canal where water passed through is dislocated or aligned. Napuputol yung linya ng tubig, tapos di na nababalik muli. Other canals are uncovered, causing the water to evaporate, especially sa mga lugar na may mainit na climate. Research even heightened that 80% of water withdrawn for irrigation do not reach its intended destination or farms. Another is excessive use of water at certain farmland, which is not only wasted water but also harm plants and vegetation in a condition called waterlogging. Excessive irrigation can make the soil saturated with water, thus making plants to lose oxygen. Kasi 'di ba, air only fills small holes in the soil. Ang mangyayari kapag nasobrahan ng tubig ang lupa, there will be no spaces for air to occupy and plants eventually lose oxygen to breathe. Next, we have salinization. This happens when soil is irrigated with saline or salt water. Kasi water will be absorbed by plants. In some cases, it will also evaporate or transpire but not the salt. Ang nangyayari, salt will be accumulated and increase and build up, harming plants. Well, aside from water, soil also needs supplementary nutrients, especially from inorganic one. Soil varies from places to places. Inorganic nutrients may not be present in all types of soil at different conditions. This is why farmers use fertilizer to supplement plant growth. Kaso nga lang, kahit sa fertilizer application, most farmers tend to apply excessive amounts of fertilizer due to their ignorance of the soil nutrient content. Kumbaga, nahahype na sila sa magagandang epekto ng fertilizer to the point na nalilimutan nila na ang fertilizer is only applied to soil with less fertility. Just look how American and European farmers excessively use fertilizer to their farm, but just ending up with low crop yield. Kasi nga, lahat ng sobra ay masama at nakakasama. Another concern din yung paggamit ng inorganic fertilizer wherein it really poses problem not just to the environment but consumers' health as well. Thus, To counter this, agriculturists encourage 21st century citizens and farmers to utilize organic fertilizer just like manure, planting leguminous plants as it's rich in nitrogen-fixing bacteria, and interplanting. However, tayo kasing mga tao or consumer, pag alam nating ginagamitan yan ng mga chicken manure or cow manure, nawawalan tayo ng ganang bumili. Mas nanaisin pa nating makakonsume ng mga chemicals from inorganic fertilizer. And also, using organic method except of course manure application can't fed the world. Ang tagal kaya niyan for instance kung magtatanim ka pa ng leguminous plants. But luckily, despite our inclination toward inorganic fertilizer, government have regulated and controlled application of inorganic fertilizer for everyone's and environment safety. Next, it is said here that farming is energy intensive. Well, of course, especially modern and conventional practices really have greater dependence on fossil fuel. Kasi nung na-invent na ang mga machineries and heavy equipment used in agriculture, fossil fuel dependence drastically increased. Kasi nga, of course, di naman yan aandar kung walang gasoline or diesel. Another, nung na-develop ang paggawa ng fertilizer mula sa gas, tumaas na talaga ang energy or fuel consumption kasi nga sa cultivation pa lang to plantation, application of fertilizer and insecticides, to processing and transportation, mostly machines ang ginagamit and all those machineries and equipment use diesel or gasoline to function. Kaya laki agad ng epekto ng pagtaas or pagmahal ng gasolina sa produkto and supplies prices. Moving on, we have 10.4 which is pests and pesticides. Pests simply are called to those unwanted organisms such as insects and weeds that disrupt and destroy crops and plants. Pesticides, on the other hand, are called to those chemicals that kill and drives away pests. These are classified according to target pest. We have insecticides that kills destructive insects, herbicides that kill unwanted plants like weeds, and fungicides that kill unwanted fungus. Certain pesticides of any classification can be called biocide if it kills wide variety and huge number of pests. These chemicals really help control pests in farm but also adversely impacted the environment. Later, we will talk about that. Okay, for now, let's consider history first. Over the past 1,000 years, ancient people already uses pesticide to protect their crops and farms from potential pests. Sumerians, which is the earliest civilization in Mesopotamia for instance, controlled insects and mites with sulfur. Other like Chinese, Greeks, and Roman, ito silang mga earliest civilized people also use pesticides using simple chemicals and compounds. Chinese even utilize plant-to-derived insecticides. Okay, let's compare it to modern pesticides naman. The era of synthetic organic pesticides began in 1939 upon the discovery of insecticidal property of dichlorophenyl trichloroethane or DDT by the Swiss chemist Paul Muller. DDT was that effective in controlling pests as it kills wide variety of insects while proving safe to mammals. With that, di na lang sa farm ginagamit itong DDT but also sprayed in everyone's body to drive away insects like mosquito. Kaya nung World War II, tumaas masyado ang production ng DDT because Allied armies used these chemicals on soldiers at war to prevent themselves from insect-borne diseases. Well, whether you believe or not, countless researches have proved na karamihan sa mga soldiers na namamatay at the time of war are actually not because of the bullets but because of diseases brought by microorganism and insects infection. So yun, DDT was spread everywhere. Just look at the picture on how DDT is sprayed on humans and all over the farm. But not until 1960s where people have found evidence that DDT are harmful to wildlife. Kasi 'di ba sa mga mammals lang siya proven safe, the rest na hindi pa na-prove. Ang nangyari kasi, people had noticed that peregrine falcon, bald eagle, and brown falcon na noon ay marami sa kanilang kagubatan ay unti-unti nang nawawala. Later they found out that DDT actually is thinning this eggshell of these birds. Kaya wala na masyadong nabubuhay na next generation nila. The question is, how was this happen? Well, through runoff and food chain. Kasi application nila man sa DDT kay gispray lang nila elsewhere sa farms, sa mga kabahayan, at mga tao. These chemicals were accumulated by runoff, nasasama siya sa flash flood at saka nakakain ng mga ibang hayop na siya namang pagkain nitong mga birds na to. This is why it is said dun sa opening quotation in chapter 3 sa report ni Miss Aslima, if you pick something in nature, you will find it connected to the rest of the world. Kaya nga kahit di directly sprayed yung chemicals sa mga wildlife, affected pa rin sila because nature are actually interconnected and one of those interconnection is via food chain. So, by knowing this, DDT was banned for years in many countries like America. Biologist Rachel Carson even featured the side effects of DDT in her published book entitled The Silent Spring. This is to warn people of the danger of the chemicals. DDT was just one of those synthetic pesticides highlighted, but there are actually lots of their kind invented since 1940 na may parehong storya, wherein it was believed at first to be safe but later had found out to have side effects or bad, just like pest resurgence, but we will talk more about that later. Okay, here are different types of pesticides and their characteristics. First, we have organophosphate like glyphosate, which is the most common pesticides used in America. This is applied on genetically modified crops like these so-called Roundup soybeans and corns. The success of Brazil in cultivating cerrado, yung sa case study, is actually the use of this one. Kasi 'di ba, ang soybean at corn nila man ay genetically modified to adapt the cerrado soil condition. Sa kayong climate dun ay medyo pabor sa mga pest, kaya this pesticide was really helpful to them. Next is chlorinated hydrocarbons. These are highly toxic to sensitive species. Next is fumigants or pesticides in the forms of gas. Next is inorganic pesticides which are very dangerous to environment not just of its toxicity but also because of its foreverness. Pag kasi ito na-introduce to soil, it will remains forever. Next is natural organic pesticides or what we call botanicals. These pesticides generally extracted from plants with insect-repelling property. Lastly is microbial agent or biological controls. This includes using organisms such as beneficial insect like praying mantis to combat pests or using toxins derived from organisms to suppress pests. We have here figure 10.16, the data for pesticides used in America wherein out of 5.3 billion pounds of pesticides are utilized each year, 49.1% of those, almost half, are chlorine and hypochlorite. 23.3% are conventional pesticides. This includes insecticides, herbicides, and fungicides. 6.2 are others like oil and petroleum. 15.1% are used as wood preservatives and 6.4% are specialized biocides. On the other side, figure 10.18 shows most used pesticides in America wherein surprisingly, as glyphosate was discovered, yung black line, its usage drastically increases surpassing atrazine, yung violet na line. Next, we have 10.5, the environmental effects of pesticides. Generally, there are three main environmental concerns associated with pesticides use. First is the exposure of non-target organism. Okay, not all organisms like insects, for example, are pests or destructive to farm. There are some of them like ladybugs and praying mantis which are actually beneficial. However, pesticides application, especially in commercial and industrial agriculture, machine is utilized and look at how machines sprayed it. Wala nang pinipili, di ba? It's sprayed all over the farm. Kaya pati non-target organism like beneficial insects can also be killed along with wide variety of pests upon application. So that's the first concern. Bees are one of the main pollinators that are being harmed by wide spraying of pesticides. It is being said that a third of our crops rely on pollinator to reproduce. Crops like squash, tomatoes, peppers, apples, and other trees rely on bees for pollination. Now, because of exposure of this non-target organism as a result of wide spraying of pesticides, we lose not only honeybees but also pollinators to some of our crops. Second is pest resurgence, as what we have said earlier. Well, organisms of all sorts, including virus, have their immune system which help them adapt. So, just like as human, pests also adapt to pesticides. This happen when there are at least few of them survive the toxicity of pesticides use. Kasi yung survivors will then give birth to new generation of pests having an adaptive immune system to pesticides. Kadalasan tong nangyayari sa excessive use of pesticides, yung tipong ginagamitan ng farm ng mga 3 times a week na pesticides application. The more frequent kasi the pesticides are applied, the more quickly pest immune system to adapt. Last is persistent organic pollutants or POP. Here, I want you to recall what happened in 1962, yung how does DDT affected wildlife through food chains and yung inorganic pesticides that remains in the environment forever. Okay, the concept is that pesticides are not consumed or absorbed by plants. So most of them remains in soil. Now, pag nagka-flash floods or water erosion, those chemicals will be accumulated as POP at napupunta kung saan-saan. Mostly sa riverbanks or seabed kasi dun naman napupunta ang runoffs or agos ng baha. Now, these chemicals will pollute water, thereby killing wide range of plankton communities. This is the reason why sa case study in chapter 3 ni Miss Aslima, yung Shakespeare Bay, experienced decrease in number of aquatic resources like fish and clams kasi 'di ba food chain in marine environment usually begins in plankton. This plankton will then be consumed by small fishes hanggang umabot sa tertiary consumer. Ngayon, kung namamatay ang mga planktons because of POP eroded by water from farms, the food chain will then be affected. Kasi ano ang kakainin ng mga isda, di ba? Kaya nga sa polluted bodies of water like lake, kumukunti yung mga aquatic resources. Next, we have pesticides adverse health effects. World Health Organization estimated that 25 million suffer from pesticide poisoning and at least 20,000 people die each year. This is insane number of people. Chemicals in pesticides kasi are very toxic. It requires intensive care like wearing protective equipment just like in the picture, and these equipment are very costly and not all countries can afford it. Ang nangyayari in some countries, sinasacrifice nila ang mga worker to be exposed in pesticides without wearing proper equipment. Alright, there are two types of pesticides health effect. One is acute effects. Ito yung mga agarang epekto, fast-reacting situation gaya ng pagkahilo or pagkalason ng mga workers exposed in pesticides. Two, this is chronic effect and this has long-term effects such saka hindi immediate yung epekto. Kadalasan ding mild symptoms lang na akala mo ay usual na ubo lang, yun pala complicated na mga sakit gaya ng chronic diseases, cancer, immunological and neurological problems, birth defects, even cause heredity diseases like Parkinson disease. That's how complicated it is. Anyways, natapos naman din natin itong pag-aralan in Chapter 8. It's more detailed there. Last, we have food contamination. This happened through direct or indirect exposure to pesticides. Of course, crops applied with pesticides become contaminated with it. Other crops na hindi gi-applyan ng mga pesticides can be contaminated through runoff. Kapag ang certain farm will be flooded by water and others when they are irrigated by contaminated waters. So here are 12 most contaminated foods in America based sa study. So as you can see, strawberry ranked first as the most contaminated crops. Of course, 'di ba? Kasi di gaano tumataas ang strawberry plants at saka well cared to sila. They are frequently irrigated kaya di malayong makontaminate sila through runoff or contaminated water. Alright, here there is one article about organic farming in the city for us to encourage on not only relying on commercial crop supply. Urban farming is now growing effectively sustained by the government. This is good daw kasi usually pag nasa city man, we rely on commercially produced crops grown with lots of chemicals. Kasi wala din naman tayong choice kasi nga busy tapos mahirap man ding maka-space for farming or home gardening. Kaya yung iba rin na gumagamit na lang ng hydroponic farming wherein seeds were grown in treated water. Yun nga lang, limited crops lang ang pwede sa method na to. Yung mga petchay lang for instance. But for those having vacant land, organic farming is a good business choice. Just like this family on this picture wherein nagbi-business sila ng mga crop supply na grown by them in the city. Moving on, we have 10.6, which is organic and sustainable agriculture. The entrance of 21st century marks a new movement in agriculture. This is the organic agriculture to outweigh the inorganic one or conventional practice. And this is in accordance with promoting and reinforcing environmental awareness and sustainability. The main highlight of this is to reduce reliance on utilization of chemicals that are harmful to our environment and foster the use of eco-friendly sustainable farming in return. Sustainable farming uses multitude of strategies such as planting nitrogen fixing or leguminous plant to avoid fertilizers. Tingnan niyo yung picture na nasa upper left. Using crop rotation to minimize pesticide or yung lower right left na picture, strategic water management, mixed cropping or polyculture na nasa upper right naman na picture. Ito yung pagtatanim ng hindi lang iisang crops but a combination of various crops in farm. Use of perennial or tree crops to conserve soil na nasa lower left pictures and many others. Next, we have organic food. Department of Agriculture of America defined organic food with criteria needed to fulfill in order for a certain crops or produce to be called or labeled as 100% organic. According to them, dapat ang 100% labeled organic product made of 95% organic ingredients and contain at least 70% organic material. To fulfill this, dapat yung crops at farm ay di ginamitan ng commercial pesticides at fertilizers. Not genetically modified, di rin tinurukan ng kung ano-anong hormones at lalo na ng antibiotics. This definition by far had discouraged other global supplier of the so-called organic product like China and India. Kasi the criteria daw allows for partial organic or non-sustainable production method. Or in short, hindi kasi pasado ang kanilang produkto sa nasabing criteria. Next, we have strategic management. This is the method in sustainable farming that uses only logic and practicality to drive or control pests rather than pesticide. First is crop rotation. This simply means na for instance, ngayon, yung tanim is corn, then after harvest, ang itatanim na naman is soybean. After that one, other crops na naman ang itatanim. And this is for the purpose of controlling pests. Kasi yung pests are specific to the crops. They don't feed on many crops. Nakaspecific lang talaga. So kung ngayon, corn at may pest, sa next na tanim, which is soybean, this pest would no longer destroy the crops. Magkakaroon na naman ng adjustments and adaptations sa pest na iyon. Ngayon, meron na namang pest specific for soybean. Pero sa next na tanim mo, squash na naman for example. So wala, mapapagod ang pest kaka-adapt kaya they will flee and some will also die. So sa next na corn, wala nang problemahin sa pest kasi kaunti na lang. So that's the purpose of crops rotation and it's one of the effective strategic management in driving or controlling pest. Unlike kung corn lang yung tinatanim, corn ngayon harvest to corn na naman na wala, magpo-foster talaga ang pest population. Another, but this is actually not good, yung pagsusunog at pagpapabaha sa field before taniman. Although naaalis niya ang mga pests at weeds, yun nga lang, the soil will be exposed to natural erosion. Strategic siya, however, not suitable sa mga area na madalas binabaha. Next is using organisms or the so-called natural predators to combat and control pests. Start tayo sa beneficial insects like praying mantis. This insect does not feed on plants but rather on other insects such as pests. So kung maraming mga ganito sa farm, mahihirapan ng mga pest na magparami or mag-foster ng kanilang population. Kaya in some country, pinangangalagaan tong mga beneficial insects at gifli sila sa farm to help combat pests. Next, pathogens like virus, bacteria, and fungi also can help. These pathogens do not attack pests but rather their eggs. Having these on farm would either decrease pest population or made them migrate and flee. Next is larger species like chicken. Chicken also helps, kaso si chicken, lahat ng insects ata kinakain, pati beneficial one, but they also help combat pests. Last is plant-producing insecticides and insect repellent like neem tree. This neem tree was originated from India, kaso ngayon, na-spread all over the world na siya. Dun sa amin nga sa school, we have at least 3 of this. Napagkakamalan namin itong mosquito tree. I just don't know if we are right. Kasi mosquito doesn't even go near this tree. Kasi grabe siya ka-bitter. Sa dahon, sa sanga, roots, fruits at flowers, lahat mapait, kaya it drives away pests and insecticide. So mulching or covering crops with the leaf of this tree would be effective to drive away pests. Next is the Integrated Pest Management or IPM. Same concept pero explain lang natin ang trap crop. Trap crop are crops planted at least 2 weeks before planting the intended crops. The purpose is to attract pests. Kasi of course, nauna siyang tinanim na mauuna din siyang magbunga. Kaya yung pest, napupunta doon lahat, leaving the intended crops to grow healthy. Yung trap crop na to, not necessarily the same number as the crops you intend to grow. Just enough lang to attract the pest ay sapat na. Next is mechanical cultivation and techniques na i-discuss lang natin when we reach reduced tillage system. May video pa doon. Indonesia is one of the countries having a successful IPM story. Rice farmers were relying greatly on pesticides to the extent na ang rate of application kay 3 times a week regardless of whether the farm is infested or not. So dito, grabe ang nagastos ng government sa pesticides to the extent na malulugi na sila kasi mababa pa rin ang yield. Research have found out that because of excessive application of pesticide, pest resurgence occurs. Mahirap at di namamatay ang mga pest dito sa pesticides. Kasi yun nga, the more frequent ang application na ginagawa ng kanilang mga farmers, the more na madali para sa mga pest na mag-adapt. Kaya nung na-introduce sa kanila ang IPM, President Suharto banned 56 to 57 different types of pesticides in the country. So what they did was, with the help of IPM, nag-introduce sila ng mga natural predators to farm to combat pests. Ginagamitan lang nila ng chemicals when necessary. So here is the comparison ng gastos at yield of rice treated with chemicals and IPM. So you can see naman na ang daming gastos noon sa paggamit ng chemicals. Maraming mga sinusweldohang tao. Bayad pa sa pesticide, tingnan nyo yung yield, mas mataas pa ang yield with IPM despite ang baba ng gastos. By the way, noong old days pa to, wala pang mga tractors at machineries kaya mano-mano talaga ang spray ng pesticides. Total gastos nila is 27.5 rupiah per sacks, while dun sa IPM na 2.5 lang ang layo. So that's it. If we reflect on this, marami naman din talagang ways to do in lieu of using commercial chemicals. Tapos ang gaganda pa ng mga yield. Kaso kasi tayo nga sa latter generation, we want instant and convenient. May machine naman na mas mabilis at mas madali, kaya ba't pa tayo nagpapahirap mag-go back sa organic and sustainable farming? Isa pa sa mga factor really is yung growing demand of the world. Ito ang isa sa gi-point out ng mga conventional farmers na ang sustainable practices, though environmentally friendly and sustainably, di naman daw nakaka-feed ng maraming tao. It literally cannot sustain global demands. Ang binato naman ng sustainable farmers na yung conventional practices daw constantly degraded soil and destroy environment as a whole, which is tama naman. Yung conventional practice pala is yung mga nag-use ng chemicals and heavy equipment. Yung sustainable naman is yung new movement kumbaga ngayon which promotes organic farming. Tayo rin kasing mga consumer, mga tao, nagpaparami na nga ang lalakas pa nating mag-consume. Kaya kahit anong gawin ng sustainable farming, di talaga kayang i-sustain ng global demand. But let's just hope that one day sustainable agriculture will outweigh conventional agriculture. Last subtopic under this chapter is 10.7, which is soil conservation. Soil conservation is very much important, especially in the face of threat of soil degradation and desertification. So previously, we have learned that overgrazing, excessive planting, and overcultivation contributes to soil degradation as it exposes loose nutrient-rich soil to erosion. So to counter that, here are some of the ways to conserve soil. First, contour plowing and strip farming. This is especially sa mga farm on a slopey area where erosion is prevailing. Dito, since yung tubig o baha ay rumaraga sa pababa, ang ginagawa is gumagawa ang mga farmers ng mga contour perpendicular to flowing water down hills, katulad sa picture sa left, and this is to hold soil from eroding with water. Nasasala kasi ng contour na ito ang mga loose soil kaya after ng baha, ipoplow na lamang sila ulit pabalik. Next is terracing. A good example is our wonderful Banawi rice terraces. Same concept pa rin to hold soil. But here, para mas masala talaga ang soil, ang tanim sa edge ng each layer ay mga soil anchoring plant species or yung mga plants na malakas mang-hold ng soil. Next is planting perennial tree crops like coffee or oranges. Ito naman is sa patag na lupa. Kung yung kanina sa mga slopey area, itong mga trees naman na ito ay ginogrow sa plain or patag na farm. These trees grow for more than 2 years. Kaya maganda ito kasi pag mag-flood ang farm, nakakatulong sila not just to absorb water but also hold soil. Next is cover crop. This crop like rye or clover will be planted immediately after harvest. Kasi pag wala na ang plant, soil will be exposed to erosion. Kaya tinataniman nila agad ng mga cover crops to hold the soil in place. Para at least kung magbahaman, di gaanong matangay ang mga loose nutrient-rich soil. These cover crops will just then be plowed kapag ka magtatanim na naman. Grabe, panakibutas lang pala sila. Lastly is mulching. Mulch is called to those covering crops or to those covering that protects soil while plants are growing. A good example is rice straw or rice husk. Next is tillage system or yung paglilinis ng field or pagbubungkal ng lupa before planting. Tillage also exposes soil to erosion. Thus, reduced tillage system helps conserve soil. So we have 3 different reduced tillage systems. And for this, let's just watch the video.
Conservation tillage is perhaps the most effective practice available to farmers to reduce wind and water erosion and to improve soil quality on cropland. Not only is conservation tillage beneficial to the environment, it makes economic sense through savings in fuel, chemicals, and time. Any tillage system that leaves more than 30% of the soil surface covered with crop residue is considered conservation tillage. The amount of residue is measured after the field is planted. By increasing the amount of residue on the surface, conservation tillage reduces erosion and runoff. Soil moisture is conserved for crop use and increased yields. Also, the amount of soil particles emitted into the air is reduced. Crop residue controls all types of water erosion by reducing the effects of raindrop splash and water runoff. By limiting the amount of tillage and building up organic matter in the soil, water and nutrient infiltration will improve over time. Maintaining crop residue also helps to control wind erosion. As wind speed increases, the amount of soil picked up on a bare field may double or even triple. For instance, if a 20-mile-per-hour wind increases to 30 miles per hour, the rate of erosion will triple. The major conservation tillage systems are no-till and mulch-till. The effectiveness of these different tillage systems in controlling wind and water erosion depends on how much the soil is disturbed and the amount of residue that is buried versus the amount that is left near the surface of the field. The Cadillac of conservation tillage systems is no-till. No-till can reduce erosion by up to 90% compared to conventional tillage methods. In no-till, the soil is left undisturbed after harvest and through planting. Planting or drilling the seed disturbs only a narrow portion of the row width. Disc openers, coulters, or row cleaners are used at planting time to cut and clear a narrow band of last year's residue. Mulch till disturbs the residue on the entire field prior to or during planting, but still leaves at least 30% of the soil surface covered in residue. Tillage equipment is used to work the soil and bury some of the residue. Tillage tools may include chisels, discs, or field cultivators. Some changes in equipment are required when switching to less tillage. However, the initial cost of changing tillage systems will be offset by eventual savings in time, fuel, and equipment depreciation. Conservation tillage methods provide both economic and environmental benefits over time. Economic benefits include savings in time, fuel, and machinery, as well as wear and tear on equipment. Profitability can increase with conservation tillage because of lower input costs. Producers must weigh the pros and cons of conservation tillage as it relates to their own unique operation.
The Zero Tillmaster has been developed and designed by Rogro Machinery over many years into a proven planting unit, withstanding the harsh and varied conditions of the Australian environment, with reduced maintenance and easily changed for winter and summer crops. The Zero Tillmaster planter is a robust machine that places the seed where it is required into the moisture level. The heavy-duty parallelogram assists in maintaining an even flow of operation and maintenance of depth control. This row unit is a reliable, reduced-maintenance planter designed to plant into heavy crop residue, maintaining maximum moisture and soil contact with the seed. The Zero Tillmaster uses a coulter to cut the stubble in front of the tine which it plants the seed into. Designed and strengthened so it's capable of moisture seeking with minimal maintenance. Major features include a gauge wheel with inbuilt safety for row travel, 50cm coulter, high-pressure press wheel and shear pin tine with 680 kilograms breakout pressure with Keach points. Options for the Zero Tillmaster include finger chain harrows and trip release. Standard tine can be replaced by double discs and V-press wheel assemblies. Increase crop yields with the Zero Tillmaster. Visit us at rogro.com.au to order yours today.
So, as you can see, mas makokonserve natin ang lupa kung yung tataniman natin is di nalinisan. of course, yung mga weeds alisin natin kaso ipa-decompose na lamang doon sa soil at di na alisin. So that's it. Next is low input agricultural aid saka consumer's choice. The concept simply, kung hindi tayo gagamit ng mga heavy machinery sa pag-cultivate ng land for instance, mako-conserve talaga natin ang soil. Kasi pag machine ang luminis sa soil, like land mower na wala, makakalbo talaga ang lupa and water and wind erosion would have just freely moved soil elsewhere. Just like in the picture, yung family na yan na may farm, ang mga baka lang ang ginagamit nila sa paglilinis ng mga grass. Pinapakain lang nila sa mga baka na yan ang grass kaya walang problema kasi di naman ganun kalinis ang land pag kinakain ng baka as compared to machine ang naglinis sa farm. Last is consumer's choice. Here, sinasabing conservation of land is also in everyone's hand. Kung palagi tayong magre-rely sa commercial and industrial products na wala, madidegrade na talaga ang soil kasi machines man ang gamit pag sa commercial at industrial farming. Pero kung locavores tayo or in favor of local crops grown by local farmers, na we can help conserve soil kasi wala naman ding machines ang mga local farmers. Mano-mano lang sila. So again and again, wala pa rin talaga tayong ligtas sa responsibility towards environmental concern. Kahit na wala tayong ginagawa, pag-consume pa lang natin or pagsakay sa jeep, na grabing contribution na ang nagagawa natin sa pag-destroy ng environment. So we better have self-reflection on this by our own. Last, we have here exploration part, the ancient Terra Peta which until now have puzzled scientists. This is located on part of Amazon forest wherein soil is believed to be unproductive because of its high acidity. However, nung nahukay nila ang Terra Peta, they found out that soil over here is so fertile. Their theory is that long ago there were community too less to be considered civilization exist here. They even believe that there were cities here, and the theory says that what caused these places abandoned is due to diseases. Namatay yung mga tao at nag-migrate ang iba, leaving their materials here na na-decompose and contributes to soil fertility. So the implication of this gives us idea on how to build up soil. And that would be all for my part. Thank you for your listening and wassalam.